Hollywood has always sold the dream of eternal glamour. When the cameras rolled and the lights hit the silver screen, the stars seemed untouchable, immortal figures who earned more money than most people could imagine. Their names appeared in bold letters, their faces plastered across magazines, their paychecks rumored to dwarf those of politicians and businessmen alike. To the public, they were the very definition of rich and famous. But behind the velvet curtain, a far darker reality was unfolding. Some of Hollywood's brightest stars, after making millions, would die penniless, buried in debt, abandoned by the very system that once worshipped them. This paradox has haunted Hollywood since its earliest days. In the golden age of the 1930s through the 1950s, contracts tied actors to the studios, stripping them of financial independence. Stars were paid handsomely, yes, but only so long as they produced hits. If they faltered, if they resisted, or if they simply aged, the money dried up instantly. Worse still, many were never taught how to manage their fortune, surrounded by greedy managers, exploitative agents, or even family members who viewed them as walking bank accounts. These stars were often victims of a system designed to profit from their labor while giving them little security. Consider the irony. Bela Lugosi, the original Dracula, whose chilling performance defined the horror genre, was laid to rest in his Dracula cape, but his bank account was nearly empty. Judy Garland, beloved worldwide as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, brought joy to millions with her voice, yet she died at 47 in debt, struggling just to keep a roof over her head. Mickey Rooney, one of the highest-paid actors of the 1940s, squandered an estimated $12 million and spent his later years testifying before Congress about elder financial abuse. And Sammy Davis Jr., the Rat Pack legend who earned tens of millions, died with more debt than wealth, entangled in tax battles that stripped his estate bare. Their stories force us to ask uncomfortable questions. How could people who earned so much, who entertained millions, and who seemed to have it all, lose everything? Were they victims of their own poor choices, reckless spending, and addictions? Or were they casualties of a predatory system, Hollywood studios, dishonest managers, and financial vultures circling around the vulnerable? In truth, it was both. These tragedies reveal not only the fragility of fame, but also the cold machinery of an industry that prioritized profit over human beings. In the coming chapters, we'll explore these stars' lives, not just their dazzling successes, but also their quiet, desperate downfalls, because their cautionary tales remain as relevant today as they were decades ago. Hollywood is a dream factory, but dreams often come at a cost. For Bela Lugosi, Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, and Sammy Davis Jr., the cost was devastating. They paid in blood, sweat, and years of labor, only to leave this world nearly as poor as they had begun. And the most haunting part? Many of their fans never knew. While the magazines printed glossy photos of premieres and parties, the truth, the unpaid bills, the tax collectors at the door, the pawned jewelry, was carefully hidden. It's time to lift that curtain and face the reality the studios never wanted us to see. To understand why so many stars who once swam in wealth later drowned in debt, we have to look beyond individual choices. The truth lies in the very structure of Hollywood itself, particularly during the so-called Golden Age. Studios were not just employers, they were empires. And the actors, despite their glamorous appearances, were little more than employees under strict contracts, bound by clauses that determined not just their work, but often their personal lives. These contracts were ruthless. A star might earn what seemed like a fortune, $3,000 to $5,000 a week in the 1930s or 1940s, but the studio had absolute control. They dictated which films the star appeared in, which public events they attended, even who they could date or marry. Refusal meant suspension, and suspension meant no paycheck. Worse, stars often had to pay for their own publicity, costumes, or travel, which ate away at their income. Then came the issue of financial management. Most actors had little formal education and money. Coming from modest backgrounds, they suddenly found themselves handed sums that seemed endless. But they were encouraged by managers, by studios, by society to spend lavishly. A mansion in Beverly Hills, luxury cars, parties with champagne flowing like water. These were not luxuries but expectations. To appear wealthy was part of the job. Stars who did not spend were seen as failures. Their careers at risk of fading because Hollywood fed on image as much as talent. Behind the scenes, another kind of predator lurked. Unscrupulous managers and agents exploited their clients, charging exorbitant fees or siphoning off money in shady investments. For Judy Garland, the problem wasn't just her spending, it was that her handlers treated her like a bottomless well. MGM Studios overworked her, forced her into relentless tours and lined the pockets of executives, while Garland herself spiraled deeper into financial instability. By the time she realized how dire her situation was, the mountain of debt had already formed. And let's not forget taxes. Many actors, dazzled by their paychecks, failed to grasp how much they owed the government. Sammy Davis Jr. was one of the most glaring examples. He earned millions as part of the Rat Pack and from his solo career, but lax oversight, poor bookkeeping, and extravagant spending collided with tax laws. When the IRS finally came knocking, Davis found himself staring at millions in unpaid taxes, an amount he could never fully repay before his death. Mickey Rooney's case revealed another dimension: family betrayal. Rooney claimed that those closest to him, his stepson, his wife, and even people he trusted as guardians, took advantage of him. Despite earning around $12 million across his career, he was left with virtually nothing. In his later years, he even testified before Congress about elder abuse, describing how the people around him drained his finances while he was left with scraps. The system wasn't just broken, it was designed to break the stars. Studios squeezed every drop of profit from actors while discouraging them from planning for the future. Once the stars aged out of their roles, once the public's taste changed, they were discarded like yesterday's news. The fame and fortune vanished almost overnight, but the debts, the obligations, and the bad contracts remained. This is why so many Hollywood icons, people who once appeared larger than life, ended up facing foreclosure notices, tax collectors, or bankruptcy courts. It wasn't simply that they lived recklessly, though many did. It was that the entire structure of Hollywood, from contracts to image to financial predators, made collapse almost inevitable. And in the case of Bela Lugosi, Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, and Sammy Davis Jr., this system was not just a backdrop. It was a slow-moving guillotine, lowering inch by inch until their financial ruin was complete. In 1931, audiences across America sat in hushed theaters as a tall, piercing-eyed man with a thick Hungarian accent leaned forward from the shadows and declared, "I am Dracula." That man was Bela Lugosi, and in that moment, cinema history was made. Lugosi's performance in Dracula didn't just terrify audiences, it cemented the vampire as one of Hollywood's most enduring icons. For a time, Lugosi was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. His name synonymous with horror, his image splashed across posters, newspapers, and fan magazines. But fame, especially in Hollywood, can be both a gift and a curse. For Bela Lugosi, it became a prison. His portrayal of Dracula was so iconic, so definitive, that it trapped him in a coffin he could never escape. Studio executives typecast him endlessly. If Lugosi wasn't playing Dracula, he was playing a villain cut from the same dark cloth. Offers for diverse roles dried up. Producers saw him not as an actor of range and depth, but as a one-note monster. While his career narrowed, his financial troubles deepened. Lugosi had never been taught how to handle money. Coming from modest beginnings in Hungary, he suddenly found himself with large paychecks and Hollywood expectations. He spent freely, living in luxury he could not sustain. Worse, as Universal and other studios pushed younger horror stars like Boris Karloff, Lugosi's offers dwindled. Karloff, who portrayed Frankenstein's monster, managed to reinvent himself, but Lugosi remained shackled to Dracula's cape. Then came the personal demons. Lugosi developed a crippling addiction to morphine, initially prescribed for chronic sciatica. Addiction in Hollywood was not unusual, but in Lugosi's case, it became a full-blown scandal. Work grew scarcer. His once terrifying presence was now overshadowed by whispers of drug abuse, unreliability, and desperation. As offers vanished, so too did his money. By the 1940s, Bela Lugosi, once the king of horror, was struggling to pay rent. His fame endured in the public imagination, but it did not translate into financial security. Lugosi accepted work in low-budget, poverty row films, often parodies of his own Dracula character. He appeared in comedies, in forgettable B-movies, even in roles so humiliating they seemed designed to mock his former glory. Yet he kept working because he had no choice. He needed the money, even if it was mere scraps compared to his early career. Perhaps the most tragic twist came in the 1950s, when Lugosi collaborated with filmmaker Ed Wood. Wood, now considered a cult figure, was infamous in his own time for making some of the worst movies ever produced. For Lugosi, working with Wood was not about artistry, it was about survival. In films like Glenn or Glenda in Bride of the Monster, audiences could see a once mighty star reduced to low-rent productions, his talent squandered. To many fans, these roles were heartbreaking, proof of just how far the mighty had fallen. Financially, Lugosi was destitute. He admitted publicly to his addiction in a shocking 1955 press conference, becoming one of the first actors to seek treatment in the glare of the media. It was a bold and vulnerable move, but also a sign of just how desperate he had become. By then, he was relying on the Screen Actors Guild and other charitable organizations for assistance. When Bela Lugosi died in 1956 at the age of 73, he left behind little more than debts and broken dreams. In a gesture that symbolized both his triumph and his tragedy, his family honored his wish to be buried in the Dracula cape. To the public, it was poetic. Lugosi, eternally Dracula. But to those who knew him, it was also painfully ironic. He had given his life to a role that both made him and destroyed him, a performance so iconic it trapped him forever. The contrast could not have been starker. Bela Lugosi had once earned a fortune, headlined international blockbusters, and terrified audiences across the globe. Yet he died in near poverty, reliant on the kindness of friends and fans. The millions he once commanded were gone, eaten away by addiction, by exploitation, by an industry that discarded him the moment he was no longer profitable. Lugosi's story is more than the tale of one man's downfall. It is a chilling warning about the cost of Hollywood fame. Stardom in the golden age was not security. It was a gamble, a fragile bargain with an industry that could exalt you one year and abandon you the next. Bela Lugosi's Dracula will live forever. But the man behind the cape, the man who gave the character life, ended his own life story in poverty and isolation. And the cruelest irony? Dracula never dies, but Bela Lugosi did, alone, broke, and forgotten by the very system that once promised him immortality. When Judy Garland first stepped onto the stage as a child, her voice was unlike anything audiences had ever heard. Rich, powerful, filled with raw emotion far beyond her years, her gift was undeniable. At just 16, she became immortalized as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz in 1939. Somewhere Over the Rainbow was not merely a song, it was a national anthem of hope during the Great Depression, and Garland was its messenger. Hollywood declared her a treasure, a prodigy destined for greatness. But behind that sweet smile and soaring voice was a machine that treated Judy not as a girl, not even as a person, but as a product. MGM Studios, her employer, controlled every detail of her life. They fed her pills to keep her awake, pills to help her sleep, pills to keep her thin. When she broke down, she was told to pull herself together. Her childhood was stolen, replaced by stage lights and the studio demands. And while the world celebrated Dorothy's journey down the yellow brick road, Garland herself was being led down a much darker path. Financially, Judy Garland should have been untouchable. She earned millions through her films, concerts, and recordings. At her peak, she was one of the highest-paid performers in the world, commanding sellout crowds wherever she sang. Yet Garland's life became a cycle of soaring earnings and crushing losses. Why? Because MGM and her management treated her less like a star and more like a bank. Money came in, yes, but it flowed straight out again, consumed by agents, managers, lawyers, and endless expenses. Judy's generosity also worked against her. She often helped friends, paid off debts for others, and supported those who clung to her for financial stability. Add to that her own struggles with addiction. Pills that were first forced upon her as a teenager now dictated her adult life, and Garland's judgment faltered. Deals were signed without care, loans taken without strategy, contracts agreed to under duress. By the 1950s, Judy's career was collapsing. MGM had dropped her, citing her unreliability. Concerts were canceled when she failed to appear. Hotels barred her for unpaid bills. Yet whenever she was on stage, her voice, broken, fragile, but achingly beautiful, still brought audiences to tears. People threw flowers, stood in ovations, and shouted her name. But when the lights dimmed, Garland returned to hotel rooms where creditors were waiting, where letters of foreclosure piled up, where she counted coins just to keep going another day. Her marriages only worsened her plight. Garland was married 5 times, and each union came with new financial entanglements. Her third husband, Sid Luft, took control of her career in the 1950s, managing her comeback with the film A Star is Born, 1954. It was supposed to revive her fortune. And while Garland delivered one of the greatest performances of her career, the film's profits mysteriously vanished. Luft's management drained her finances, and Garland accused him of gambling away her money. Their bitter divorce left her with mounting legal bills and more debt than security. By the 1960s, Judy Garland's life had become a tragic spectacle. She toured relentlessly, not out of passion, but out of necessity. Concerts in London, New York, and Sydney kept her afloat for brief moments, but most of the profits went straight to creditors or the IRS. In 1964, she declared bankruptcy, owing over $500,000, a staggering figure for someone who had earned many millions across her lifetime. Still, Garland pressed on, driven by both resilience and desperation. In her final years, she was reduced to singing in small clubs. Her once golden voice weakened, her body exhausted. Fans still adored her, but they could see the cracks, the trembling hands, the erratic behavior, the pain in her eyes. She joked bitterly about her situation, once telling an audience, "I can't afford to retire, I'd go hungry." On June 22, 1969, Judy Garland died in London at the age of 47. The official cause was an accidental overdose of barbiturates. But in truth, her death was the culmination of decades of exploitation, addiction, and financial ruin. She left behind more debt than assets, her estate valued at just a fraction of the fortune she had earned. The little girl who had once symbolized hope for millions had been drained dry by the very system that built her up. Her funeral in New York drew thousands of fans who lined the streets, singing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" as her coffin passed. To them, Judy Garland was immortal. But behind the myth was a woman who had been used, discarded, and left to fend for herself in an unforgiving industry. Perhaps the cruelest truth of all is this: Judy Garland had given everything, her childhood, her health, her voice, to the world, and in return the world cheered, applauded, and adored her, while the machinery of Hollywood and those closest to her took nearly every penny she made. Garland's story is not just a tragedy of one woman's downfall. It is a mirror of a system that destroys the very talent it depends on. She remains beloved, celebrated, even worshipped. But the woman behind Dorothy's ruby slippers died broken, exhausted, and financially ruined. And like Bela Lugosi before her, Judy Garland's story forces us to confront the truth. In Hollywood, even the brightest rainbow can fade into darkness. If Judy Garland was Hollywood's tragic songbird, Mickey Rooney was its eternal boy wonder. In the 1930s and 1940s, he was everywhere. On screen, on radio, in magazines. With his infectious grin, boundless energy, and ability to sing, dance, and act with equal brilliance, Rooney became one of MGM's most bankable stars. He wasn't just a child actor, he was the child actor, the face of America's youth during the darkest years of the Depression and World War II. At the height of his fame, Rooney was the #1 box office draw in the world for 3 consecutive years. His paychecks were astonishing for the time, and by some estimates, over the course of his career, he earned around $12 million. equivalent to over $150 million today. By all accounts, Mickey Rooney should have lived out his days in comfort, enjoying the rewards of a lifetime of work. But instead, he ended his life in near poverty, fighting lawsuits, begging for protection from financial abuse, and lamenting the fortune that slipped through his fingers. The seeds of this downfall were planted early. Like Judy Garland, Rooney was a child star raised in the MGM system. He began performing in vaudeville before he was even 2 years old, thrust on stage by his ambitious parents. By the time he reached adolescence, fame was second nature, and so was the lack of control over his own life. Studios made his decisions, his parents took his earnings, and Mickey himself had no understanding of what it meant to save or invest. To him, money was something that came fast and easy and would always come again. As a young adult, he embraced a lifestyle of extravagance. Mansions, cars, women. Rooney spent as quickly as he earned. His charm and charisma translated into a notorious love life. Over his lifetime, he married 8 times, each union costing him an alimony, legal battles, or both. His first wife was none other than Ava Gardner, who would go on to become one of Hollywood's most glamorous stars. Their marriage lasted only a year, but the headlines set the tone for Rooney's reputation as a man who couldn't hold on to either love or money. Meanwhile, the roles began to shift. By the late 1940s, audiences were moving on from the cheerful Andy Hardy character that had made Rooney a star. Unlike actors who transitioned successfully into adult roles, Rooney struggled to shed his boyish image. His popularity waned, and so did the size of his paychecks. But his expenses, lavish, impulsive, and constant, did not. To make matters worse, Rooney fell prey to poor financial management and outright exploitation. Unscrupulous agents and business managers siphoned away his earnings through shady deals and bad investments. Rooney trusted easily, perhaps too easily, and those around him knew it. Millions vanished into questionable ventures, while the actor himself remained oblivious. By the 1960s and 1970s, Mickey Rooney's career had declined sharply. He worked tirelessly, appearing in television shows, stage productions, and smaller films. Anything to keep money flowing. But despite his efforts, bankruptcy filings loomed. In 1962, he declared insolvency for the first time. The man who had once been Hollywood's highest-paid star now owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to creditors and the IRS. Rooney's story took an even darker turn in his later years. In 2011, at the age of 90, he stunned the public by testifying before Congress about elder abuse. His voice trembling, he described how his stepson and wife had emotionally and financially abused him, leaving him powerless and humiliated. "For years I suffered silently," he said. "I didn't want to tell anyone. I couldn't muster the courage to seek the help I knew I needed." The revelation shocked fans who had grown up idolizing him. Here was Mickey Rooney, once the world's most beloved entertainer, reduced to pleading for legal protection against those closest to him. When Rooney died in 2014 at the age of 93, his estate was valued at only $18,000. For a man who had earned the modern equivalent of hundreds of millions, the figure was almost unthinkable. There was no Hollywood mansion, no nest egg, no golden retirement. He had outlived not just his fame, but also his fortune. Yet despite his financial ruin, Rooney never stopped working. He acted for nearly 9 decades, a record few could match. He appeared in more than 300 films and television shows, leaving behind a legacy of laughter, music, and performance. But his life stands as one of Hollywood's greatest cautionary tales. Proof that even the most successful careers can collapse under the weight of mismanagement, extravagance, and betrayal. Mickey Rooney's story forces us to confront a haunting question. What good is fame without security? He gave his life to Hollywood, beginning as a toddler and continuing until his final years. The world adored him, cheered for him, and remembered his boyish smile. But when the curtain fell, he was left with almost nothing. Just a few $1,000s and a trail of broken dreams. Like Bela Lugosi and Judy Garland before him, Mickey Rooney was both a star and a victim of the system. His story reminds us that behind Hollywood's glittering illusion lies a far harsher reality. Fame is fleeting, money slips away, and even the brightest stars can die broke. In the golden lounges of Las Vegas, in the smoke-filled clubs of New York, and on television screens across America, Sammy Davis Jr. seemed untouchable. He could sing with the smoothness of Nat King Cole, dance with the fire of Gene Kelly, act with the charisma of a leading man, and even play multiple instruments with virtuoso skill. Known as Mr. Show Business, Davis embodied the very spirit of entertainment, and as a core member of the legendary Rat Pack, alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, he epitomized glamour, talent, and success. But like so many Hollywood stories, Sammy Davis Jr.'s tale has a cruel twist. Despite earning tens of millions across his career, he died in 1990, owing the IRS more than $5 million, leaving his widow and children to face a mountain of debt. His downfall was not the result of a single mistake, but rather a storm of extravagance, systemic exploitation, and financial mismanagement. Born in 1925, Davis began performing as a child in vaudeville, dancing alongside his father and uncle in the Will Maston Trio. He never had a normal education. The stage was his classroom, and audiences were his teachers. By the time he was an adult, he was already a seasoned entertainer who could outshine almost anyone. But with talent came temptation, and with success came predators. During the 1950s and 1960s, Davis was one of the highest-paid entertainers in the world. His nightclub acts sold out for weeks, his records topped charts, and his film roles brought in significant checks. When he performed with Sinatra and Martin, casinos lined up to pay astronomical fees. Yet Davis spent as quickly as he earned. He bought flashy cars, lavish homes, and expensive jewelry. He indulged in fine wines, clothes, and art. He lived the very image of Rat Pack extravagance, because in those circles, anything less would be seen as weakness. But spending wasn't the only problem. Davis also gave generously, often to friends, family, and even strangers. His entourage was large, and supporting them drained his fortune. Worse still, the IRS began circling. Davis's financial managers had neglected taxes for years, failing to withhold and pay what was owed. By the 1970s, his tax debt had ballooned to millions, compounded by penalties and interest. Desperate, Davis worked endlessly. He toured relentlessly, sometimes performing multiple shows a night just to chip away at the debt. He took on television appearances, commercials, and any opportunity to earn. Yet every dollar he made seemed to disappear instantly, gobbled up by the IRS, creditors, or more bad financial deals. Friends later recalled how Davis would perform with dazzling energy on stage, only to retreat backstage exhausted, burdened by the knowledge that he was essentially working not for himself, but for the government. The irony was bitter. Here was Sammy Davis Jr., a man who had broken racial barriers in entertainment, who had befriended presidents, who had sung for royalty, reduced to a kind of indentured servitude, chained not by studios, but by debt. Even his friendships within the Rat Pack could only help so much. Sinatra reportedly paid off some of Davis's bills and helped secure gigs, but the debt was too massive to erase. By the late 1980s, Davis's health was failing. He was diagnosed with throat cancer in 1989, a cruel fate for one of the world's greatest singers. Treatment was costly, and though fans and friends rallied to support him, the financial pressure remained suffocating. When Davis died in 1990 at the age of 64, he left behind not a fortune, but a legacy of debt. His widow, Altavis Davis, was left to negotiate with the IRS, eventually settling for a fraction of what was owed after years of legal wrangling. Sammy Davis Jr.'s downfall was both deeply personal and broadly symbolic. Personally, it was the story of a man who gave everything to his craft, who sought acceptance in a world that often marginalized him for his race, his faith, he converted to Judaism, and even his physical stature. He fought tirelessly to prove he belonged, and in doing so, he gave audiences performances of staggering brilliance. Yet the cost was devastating. Symbolically, Davis's fate echoed those of Bela Lugosi, Judy Garland, and Mickey Rooney. All four were once among the brightest stars in Hollywood. All four earned fortunes that most people could only dream of, and all four died either broke or buried under debt. Their stories reveal a haunting pattern. In the machinery of fame, money flows freely, but rarely to the stars themselves in the long run. Whether it was studios exploiting Garland and Rooney, typecasting and addiction destroying Lugosi, or tax mismanagement crushing Davis, the result was the same. These were artists who entertained the world, but who were left vulnerable, unprotected, and ultimately ruined. Their cautionary tales remind us that Hollywood's promise of wealth is often an illusion, a glittering facade hiding a system that consumes more than it gives. In the end, Sammy Davis Jr. died as he had lived, working, performing, giving everything to his audience. But his final curtain call came not in triumph, but in tragedy. And like Lugosi, Garland, and Rooney, he proved that even the greatest stars are not immune to Hollywood's most enduring curse, to die broke after earning millions. The legacy of these stars is not just their films, their songs, or their performances. It is also the warning they leave behind. Fame without security is fragile. Fortune without protection is fleeting. And in Hollywood, where image often matters more than truth, even the brightest lights can be extinguished in darkness. Hollywood has always sold itself as a dream factory. It promises immortality, your face projected on the silver screen, your voice echoing through concert halls, your name written in lights. For a while, Bela Lugosi, Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, and Sammy Davis Jr. seemed to embody that dream. They entertained millions, earned fortunes, and lived lives that appeared dazzling from the outside. But the truth is far more complicated. Beneath the glamour were contracts designed to exploit, managers who took more than they gave, addictions that hollowed out health and wealth, and a system that consumed talent until nothing was left. These stars did not simply make bad choices. They were chewed up by a machine that never taught them how to survive once the lights dimmed. Bela Lugosi, buried in his Dracula cape, left behind little more than debts. Judy Garland, the eternal Dorothy, gave the world a rainbow but died with almost nothing to her name. Mickey Rooney, once Hollywood's most bankable star, lived long enough to see his fortune vanish at the hands of betrayal and abuse. And Sammy Davis Jr., the electrifying Rat Pack legend, sang and danced until cancer silenced him, while the IRS circled his estate like vultures. Their stories are cautionary tales, but they are also deeply human. They remind us that fame does not equal freedom, that wealth does not guarantee security, and that talent alone cannot protect against exploitation. They show us that the very industry that builds legends can also destroy them, leaving behind headlines of bankruptcy, addiction, and despair. And yet, perhaps the most haunting truth is this: the art remains. We still watch Dracula and marvel at Lugosi's hypnotic presence. We still cry when Garland sings Somewhere Over the Rainbow. We still laugh at Rooney's boyish charm and tap our feet to Davis's dazzling performances. Their legacies endure, even if their fortunes did not. So the question is, have things really changed? In today's world of viral fame, million-dollar contracts, and social media stardom, are we still watching the same cycle unfold? Or will Hollywood and its stars finally learn from the tragedies of the past? Because if history has taught us anything, it is this: in Hollywood, the spotlight may shine bright, but it does not shine forever. And when it fades, what remains can be either a legacy or a cautionary tale.